Hello, I'm George Herbig, Chief Forecaster, here with Weather Now Kentucky, and we're going to skip the whole intro and kind of just go right into this thing because that's quite a bit to talk about here. We have two separate rounds of severe weather potentially on Friday night going into Saturday morning, as well as Saturday evening going into Sunday morning. So I want to kind of spend some time talking about the details that we expect because I think at different points throughout different times, there's going to be different areas involved with different risk of severe weather. So you heard all those terms there, and that just kind of tells you how complex the event that we're going to be dealing with is. I want to start here with the SPC outlooks from the National Weather Service here. You know, a lot of times we make our own forecast and make our own maps, but I find that that can get a little bit confusing during very, multiple part events, if you will, such as this. So we're going to just roll with their maps and then kind of give you our own perspective on things here. So here's your categorical risk for Friday, March 14th. And now, again, this is going to be for a very late Friday, mostly during the overnight hours into Saturday morning, I should say. You can see we have pretty much the entire rainbow almost here in Kentucky. A general thunderstorm risk out there in very light green, a 1 out of 5 for dark green, 2 out of 5 for yellow, 3 out of 5 for orange, 4 out of 5 for Western Kentucky. This is our first moderate risk of the year. I do believe it's quite warranted. Again, I think we could probably see a moderate risk stretching into Southern Kentucky for Saturday evening, but we'll get to that here in a second. But there are your risk for categorical. Let's go ahead and take a look at your tornado outlook here. And here you have a 2% risk in green, a 5 to 9% risk in brown, and a 10 to 14% risk in yellow. And the hatched area is a greater than or equal to 10% probability of a significant tornado. So again, significant meaning EF2 or higher. Now, of course, that's not a guarantee. What these probabilities are based off of is X occurring within a 25-mile point of view. So something occurring within a 25-mile point. So that would be a 10% risk of a tornado occurring, significant tornado occurring within a 25-mile point. I know it's kind of confusing. I wish there was an easier way to display these, but this is quite the simplest way to do this. This is basically going to be from Owensboro down to Hopkinsville to points west into Paducah, Madisonville, Murray, Mayfield, all those folks that generally see the highest severe risk in Kentucky almost every severe season. A no tornado risk, by the way, for Friday night going into Saturday morning out there for Eastern Kentucky. Storms should really die down once they get to about the I-65 line here, and you do see that displayed here via the forecast from the SPC. So again, we agree with them pretty well with where their aspects are so far. Something that's not being talked about enough in this, in my opinion. You know, the tornadoes are always going to get the headlines, but it's the wind risk. With the amount of helicity and surface shear that we're seeing, along with a little bit of buoyancy involved with this as well, and the storms being so low to the ground, I definitely think you can get some wind gusts up to 80, maybe even 85 mile per hour, especially in Illinois, but maybe even stretching down here toward Western Kentucky, maybe even to Western Tennessee. Again, you got these supercells that are going to be merging, creating tornado genesis. Doesn't always result in a tornado actually occurring, but it can result in really briefly but enhanced wind gusts. I do think scattered 45 to 55 mile per hour wind gusts will be appearing in almost all of Kentucky at some point late Friday going into Saturday morning. But in those red and purple zones especially, wind gusts could really get up there to 75 85 mile per hour. Matter of fact, the hatched area that you see there with all those lines is a greater than or equal to 10% probability of significant wind gusts of greater than or equal to 74 mile per hour wind gusts. That's tropical level winds. You're talking about a very strong system here that we're seeing that's capable of all modes of severe weather, and I do mean all. You can see here the hail threat is actually quite high for Western Kentucky as well. Matter of fact, it's a 30 to 44% chance for the possibility of greater than or equal to 2-inch diameter hail out there in Western Kentucky. That's destructive hail. So you have genuinely all modes of severe weather possible, especially for far Western Kentucky. Exactly how far east that stretches, not a guarantee, but all signs point toward the line pretty much dying out by I-65 and creating an outflow boundary for storms to spark on Saturday evening. So if that's your outlook for Friday, Let's go ahead and take a look at the outlook for Saturday real quickly, and then we'll go into the model data to look at for you. Here is your outlook for Saturday. Now, again, this is day 3, so we don't get the exact breakdowns that we saw for day 2, where it's broken down into 4 different categories, but we do get a general categorical outlook here. And the 3 out of 5 risk does extend into southern Kentucky, getting up toward Bowling Green and that Kentucky-Tennessee line there, and then pretty much the entire state is in a 2 out of 5 risk for Saturday. The reason the probabilities are not higher for Saturday, even though the potential is still there, is because the question remains, how much does it rain for us on Saturday afternoon? There will be an initial wave of thunderstorms that pushes up from Tennessee into Kentucky on Saturday afternoon into the evening time frame. Exactly how long that lasts, exactly how wide they are, exactly how impactful they are, all determines what could be seen on Saturday evening. So the reason you haven't heard Saturday being talked about too much from us specifically is because there's, quite frankly, too many question marks. You have to wait to understand what's actually going to happen until we get through Friday, Saturday morning. And unfortunately, that means we don't get to give you guys too much of a heads up, but that's just how it works sometimes in the weather world. We have to kind of play it by ear. And the way our weather works is everything is a domino effect. So what occurs Friday and what occurs Saturday is absolutely going to impact what happens on Saturday evening. If we do see more clearing, if the rain isn't as expansive, and we see that line being able to make it up into west central Kentucky, well, then you have a higher potential for severe weather for the I-65 line over toward the I-75 line, and so on and so forth, and even for far out in eastern Kentucky, places like Prestonsburg, places like Williamsburg, places like Pikeville, all the way now in eastern Kentucky. So there's so much potential there for Saturday, but there are way too many questions. I'll put it this way: there are more questions than answers right now for Saturday. It really is a wait and see game for that day. So let's go over here to the model data real quickly, and I'm not going to go into this too much here, just because again there are more questions for Saturday than anything, but we will touch base really heavily on Friday. So there is some difference in the model data, and it's not too much of a discrepancy, but it's enough that causes a few questions here. So I'm going to zoom into the local view here. You can look in the top left corner of your screen where my cursor is circling around. That is your time, and here's your date. So you can kind of follow the date and time with us here. So this is going to be valid for Friday at around 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. Again, nothing really going on, but I do want to show you real quickly before we go into that. Look at the temperatures that we're expecting to see on Friday. By noon, lunchtime, lower mid 70s for some folks. And then by the afternoon time, you can look at Western Kentucky there and see 82, 83, maybe even 84 degrees. Models have been running cooler than what's actually happening, so I can't rule out maybe even mid 80s occurring out for Western Kentucky for your high temperatures on Friday. Upper 70s, low 80s for the rest of Kentucky on Friday. And again, that kind of sets the stage for what's to come Friday night into Saturday morning. We have all of that warm air convection in place. And then by Friday evening, I want to show you the dew points. The dew points begin to tick up around dinner time. And you'll see by late on Friday going into Saturday morning, those dew points have eclipsed the 60-degree mark out in Western Kentucky. The reason that's important is that's kind of the sweet spot for severe weather to really begin to ramp up. And once you go above 60 and you're below 70 there, in between that 60 and 70 range, that's really the sweet spot for storms to really fire. So it's really important to track how these dew points perform on Friday night going to Saturday morning. It'll help us determine some things. And models do have that dew point uptick kind of trending into central and eastern Kentucky. But there's a whole lot of questions for that. So now I want to show you the composite reflectivity here and just kind of show you how this line is going to perform. So let's go ahead and advance this forward to 11 p.m. Eastern time. And this is not going to look like anything crazy here, but these are prefrontal storms. I'm going to kind of actually zoom this out to the regional view and kind of show you the greater aspect of things. So Illinois has almost a derecho style line there, a squall line of storms that's going to produce a lot of significant weather up there, especially winds. For us, it's more a broken line of storms at first. And this is more indicative of maybe some discrete supercell action. We know that the HRRR model can kind of overconvect, especially during the 12Z run the day before. So I'm not really taking all this little stuff into account here. But if you look at the more significant colors, you have the shapes there of the backward C's or the kidney beans, and you have them kind of spread out throughout Western Kentucky, Western Tennessee, South Central Illinois, so on and so forth. That to me indicates the potential for discrete supercells to jump in front of the actual main cold front dry line that you're looking at there. And then as they get a little bit more east there, you'll see that line tries to extend down to the south here. doesn't really quite connect. So this becomes its own congealed line here along the trough axis, and as that pushes east, will continue to produce significant winds, significant hail, and yes, the potential for tornadoes. I do think the potential for tornadoes only exists really out in western Kentucky, up to maybe Madisonville, Owensboro, and Hopkinsville. Once you get from this line here where my cursor is to the I-65 line, I believe these storms become a bit more elevated. You're going into the late overnight hours. At that point, you're losing a lot of the cape that's involved with this at the surface. So that tends to mean that storms become more elevated, and that supports more of a hail and damaging wind threat for central Kentucky. And then as these storms begin to get to the I-65 line there, you'll start to see a lot of these blues getting spread out. That is indications of an outflow boundary being laid. And as these storms die down, wind gusts along the outflow boundary will begin to really tick up very briefly. So I do think a wind gust threat is absolutely there, maybe even a downburst or a microburst threat. Basically along the I-65 line, as these storms die, once they get past it, you can see it just kind of turns into some massive rain showers out there. Very heavy rains. Flash flooding may be possible by Saturday evening out in eastern Kentucky. And then that's as far out as the short range model can see. So that's as far out as I'm going to go in this video. Again, there's too many questions on Saturday, so I'm not really going to cover Saturday too much here. But again, I just want you to know that the risk is there for Saturday. So I do want to show you the NAM3K model now, kind of give you its perspective on things. I'm going to zoom back into the local view now that you've gotten a broader look at things, and kind of just point you through Friday and Saturday. Generally the same start time. The NAM is traditionally a little bit slower with things, and it is here as well. It does have the storms approaching western Kentucky around the midnight Eastern time frame, 11 p.m. Central time. And I do think the slower that these storms are, the more time for the lower level jet to get in place for western Kentucky. So what we're rooting for actually is for these storms to actually start a little bit earlier, before the actual ingredients can catch up to it. And we've seen that idea bounce back and forth on model data. Yesterday, model data had these storms coming in around 2 to 3 a.m. Well, that was right in place for the best time of mixing ingredients to occur with a lower level jet, with the cape, with the shear helicity, all those nerdy terms. It was basically a worst case scenario. Today, what we've seen is the storm line trending a bit faster, and that's going to help. It's still going to be quite severe and quite significant, but it's going to help hopefully avoid some of the worst case scenarios that are at play. And of course, the worst case scenario is a violent tornado. We do have those ingredients in place that could produce significant tornadoes. All right, advance this forward to midnight to 1 a.m. You see it becomes pretty messy at that point. So the NAM3K only really has the tornado risk for far western Kentucky, maybe Henderson to Murray to points west, whereas the HRRR model, that one that we just looked at, had the tornado risk from Owensboro to Hopkinsville to points west. So again, a bit of variance there amongst the models, not too uncommon at this point. Hopefully by tomorrow morning, a lot of these have been nailed down and we can give you a very, very certain forecast. My goal in this video is just to show you the different scenarios that are at play here. The floor is absolutely going to be a severe event. The ceiling is a potentially mini outbreak, if you will, for Friday night going into Saturday morning. And I hate using that term, but that's the ceiling to this event. We're going to meet the ceiling? No, but that is the ceiling for the event. Advance this forward to 4 to 5 a.m. You can see that the NAM3K model is a lot more west with things, because if you looked at the HRRR model that we looked at just then, you'll see that the line actually made it to I-65 and then began to die down. The NAM3K model actually has this line dying down before it even gets to I-65. And then by the time it gets to eastern Kentucky, it's pretty much fizzled out. But we do know that the NAM3K can be a little bit too quick with outflows, a little bit too quick with dying downs of storms. So we know the biases of some of these models here. And so what we're doing is kind of taking a median of those two. And I think that's why the SPC's forecast for Friday is pretty well spot on, because it looks like they're taking the median of the two models and kind of just rode with it. Once the rapid refresh, once the HRRR model, once the NAM3K model get a little bit closer to this event, maybe by late tonight, I think we'll have a really good idea of what to expect for Friday night going into Saturday morning. But you saw the time frames there, basically approaching western Kentucky around late night on Friday toward the 11 p.m. to midnight hour. Getting to the I-65 line around the 4 to 5 a.m. hour, and then out to eastern Kentucky by sunrise on Saturday morning. Again, another potential round on Saturday evening. We'll go into that on a later video. But for now, those are the scenarios that we're looking at here in Kentucky for potentially 2 rounds of severe weather. Make sure you follow our Twitter, Facebook, and of course here on YouTube. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe button, and we'll see you guys in future videos. I'm George Herbig, Chief Forecaster here with Weather Now Kentucky. Thank you so much for tuning in.